Alrighty. Good morning, everyone. Monday morning from Access Yoga. I'm having a live chat with Ivy from Liquid Room. Hi, Steph. Hi, Nicole. Welcome. And we're going to talk all things backbending, from props to alignment, a little bit of anatomy. Hi, Digby. Welcome. And Ivy's also going to talk a little bit about the energetics and the energetic properties and qualities of backbends. Part of the reason I wanted to jump on with Ivy to chat about backbends is because I think they're such amazing therapeutic postures, but they can also be ones that cause some pain, go live, cause pain, they can cause irritation, and they can make backbends potentially have negative effects. Hi, Ivy. If we don't align the body properly. Sorry, I was just telling everyone why we need to learn a little bit more about backbends. How are you?
Yes, I'm good. Good morning, everyone. Good to be here in this lovely start of the week.
Yes, with a few positive things on the horizon for Melbourne.
Yes, definitely. It's very exciting.
Yeah.
And it's so great to see all of you joining us as well. Sorry, I'm not going to interrupt you. Keep introducing us, giving your
I was just
intro.
saying I was just saying why I was excited to talk about backbends with you, because I think they can be such therapeutic postures for our bodies, for our spines, for our shoulders, for our hips, energetically. But then if we're doing backbends not safely or aligning the body, it could cause some people pain, or it could cause some people discomfort or irritation, or the other end of it, injury, if we don't support the body properly. So they can be both really amazing energetic therapeutic postures, but if we kind of don't align the body in a way that's going to support the back bends, then it could go the other way. So that's why I'm excited to explore them and to look at how we can support the body safely. As,
Right.
yeah, as well as hear about their energetic qualities, because I think that's such a big part of backbends and why they can be so therapeutic as well.
Yeah, especially with the wheel pose. It's
Mm.
probably one of the most energizing pose you can put your whole body in, because it's opening up from your feet all the way up to your throat and your neck. So it's quite a powerful pose. So there's a lot of awareness in terms of, physical body and energetically. And um, Amelia, I'm just wondering, would it be a good idea if anyone today wanted to just, after we demo, and you have a specific question and you want to request to join, we can test this out. And what happens if you request to join, we accept you, then we could see you. And if you have specific question going, can you check my shoulders, whether I'm doing this right? Why can't I lift, or whatever that may be? What do you think about that?
Look, we can try it out and see how it
Yeah, and
goes.
see how it goes. So we're always gonna just play and have fun with it. And also give people opportunity to be more interactive with us as well, not just typing. I think sometimes we do miss typing, and we might sort of answer your question a bit later.
Yeah.
Again, yeah. So yeah, so I suppose I just a bit of recap as well. I hope everyone is comfortable with how things are going, especially if you're dialing in from Melbourne. And we are still continuing to do these live chats, and until we know what's going on with in-studio yoga and any kind of fitness, I think this is an awesome way to connect, and a great opportunity, I believe, for all of us to pay attention now. And we have access to teachers from so many different space and experiences that we can all share this information via this space. And I hope this continue as well, because I think we've opened up an entire new audience, an entire new conversation. So I'm really pleased that you know, Amelia, you and I can do this consistently and continue forward, even though when we're all back into our routine. Even if you can't jump on live, you dial in later and watch us on IGTV. I also post them on YouTube, which we'll both share the link to so that you can have access on a different platform. And so we'll make it more available as much as we can.
Yeah,
so
definitely. Yeah, that's our goal.
yeah.
So we can share what we're passionate about, the things we've learnt, and things that will hopefully help you in your home practice at the moment, and then things that you could take back into studios, whether you're a practitioner or a teacher. I think we can always continue learning, and I think that's the beauty of it, is that we can continue to evolve our practice and our knowledge, and take in little bits when we're ready to receive information. So should we get started?
Yes, let's talk about backbends. So
All
yeah,
right. Okay, so
first
before we,
pose.
yeah, so before we kind of look at the postures specifically, a couple of things I want to highlight is the anatomy side of it, because then this kind of gives us a little more understanding of why the alignment is important. Because we can talk about alignment and say this is good to stabilize and this and that, but what is actually going on in our anatomy? And this is just going to be super brief, so it's not in a full anatomy lecture for those who are like, I don't want to learn about anatomy. So a couple of things. We have in our body we have a spine, and we're probably all aware of that, but different sections of the spine have different levels of mobility and movement in the spine. And that has so many benefits because it allows us to move our spine in different ways. But also there is certain parts of the spine that tend to be a little more vulnerable because there's more movement, or we go from an area of lots of movement and then an area where there's not much movement. So then we might have like a bit of a hinge point in the spine. So let's say when I'm talking about a hinge point, a common area that we tend to hinge on or potentially compress is where the lumbar spine meets the sacrum. And so a common area, which is the bottom of the lumbar spine, top of the sacrum, we go from an area of lots of mobility in the lumbar spine, an area of not much mobility in the sacrum. And if I go into a back bend without creating a feeling of length and moving my body into like this open back bend, then I tend to just dump and hinge on my L5, S1, so bottom of my lumbar spine, top of my sacrum, because that's where we go into this hinge point. Lots of mobility, less mobility. And if I don't use my core, if I don't align my body, if I don't create space, that becomes an area that I compress. And for those who are familiar with observing backbend or observing shapes, so this could be teachers or students, one thing that I look out for a teacher is this kind of crease area in the lower back. So my lumbar spine is here, my sacrum is here. And if I was to not engage and I was just to dump into my back, and I'm highlighting this doesn't feel great, but it's not causing me pain at this moment. But this hinge point is where a lot of people tend to dump into in their back bends. And it could be in something more mild or like less intense back bend like bridge, or it could be more significant in something like wheel or even up dog. So if I don't create space or support from my core, then this is the area that tends to get compressed. So some simple cues before we look at bridge that we can work on is, firstly, I want to create space there. If I keep compressing that area, I'm going to jam into my discs. So I could create space by drawing the tailbone down. So starting to lengthen out that space, and already you can see that there's more space there. I could also start to draw in through the center of my body, so I can use my pelvic floor, my core muscles. So again, I'm now using some muscular support. And the last thing that I find really helpful is to find a hugging in of the inner seam of the legs. So if I'm coming into a back bend and I externally rotate, so my knees go out, my hips go out, I also tend to compress the area in my spine or the sacroiliac joint. So as my knees go out, my feet go out, I tend to compress. So the opposite of that would be to draw the legs slightly in or roll the legs in, and that keeps space in your sacroiliac joint. Sometimes when you're in a posture or a back bend and trying to do all of those things is really challenging to think of. So one of the props that I love to help get the action of the legs squeezing in and rolling in is a block. And it's super simple. A lot of people do this, but this is the reason why, is so that I don't splay my legs out, so I don't go into deep external rotation. I'm looking to internally rotate and find the adduction of the legs. If I squeeze my legs in, I fire my adductors, the inner seam of the legs, and that also starts to help my pelvic floor and my core muscles engage. So by giving someone a block, we take care of the legs hugging in, a little bit of the internal rotation, and also the engagement of the adductors and the core muscles. So let's have a look. Bridge. You're probably pretty familiar with bridge posture, but I could set up with the block in between my legs, feet a hip width distance. I personally don't cue my students to have my fingers reaching my heels. Part of the reason that I don't cue that is because sometimes we can end up with your knees now pressing further out, and you start to load and put pressure into the knees. So the cues I tend to use is have your heels slightly out of reach of your hands, so that as I lift up, now I've got my knees over my ankles, so they're a little further away. Yeah. And this will be personal preference, but I encourage you to play with it, try it, see what works in your body. So my heels are slightly out of reach of my hands. I'm going to draw my tailbone forward, squeeze my legs into the block, and then cinch in around the waist. Can I keep all of that as I press into my hands and then lift up halfway? So I'm not lifting up very high. And then can I find those same things again? Draw the tailbone forward, squeeze my legs, cinch in around the waist. If I can keep that, maybe I go up a little higher. Tailbone forward, squeeze the legs, scoop the belly in. If I'm wanting to open up the chest, I could interlace my fingers. But I'm just trying to prevent this kind of arching through the lumbar spine or dumping into that L5-S1. So a lot of the focus is keeping space, keeping the legs hugging together, and then trying to engage through the core. And then you can experiment with either hands down or interlaced fingers to open up through the chest. And then come all the way down and release. Ivy, do we want to have a look at you going through the posture?
Yeah. So, Amelia, before I go, I wanted to highlight the word tucking your tailbone.
Yeah.
So we use that a lot. And I think in a back bend, tucking can be over adjust our hip. And so instead of creating that natural curve by, now we cue drawing your tailbone down rather than tuck. So then we're sitting in that slouch position, isn't it? So I think a lot of people in bridge pose, we over activate perhaps. If we tuck, then we're sort of rounding our spine rather than keeping that length. So I think I just want to feel that when I go into it, if that makes sense. Yeah.
And I think this also comes down to, do people interpret it in the literal sense? So if I use tuck and people end up curling their spine right under, then that's not an effective cue. Although if I have students that I say tuck and they do the drawing of the tailbone down, it could be effective for some people. But this is where I think our cues, we need to see if they're working with our students. So if I'm observing and they're drawing their tailbone down, even if I use the word tuck, okay, that works. But if I start to notice that there is now this over exaggeration, then I need to go, okay, my language, I've emphasized it too much. So could I find something that is a little more clear? So drawing the tailbone down, I'm trying to create space. So yeah, this is where language, like I might say flat back sometimes, but I'm not necessarily looking for a perfectly flat back. but
Yeah.
I'm often looking to come out of a rounded position or an arch position. So sometimes those cues could get me to where I want, or sometimes they could take me too far. So yeah, I think it really depends on your students and also how they interpret it as well.
Yeah, and I think there's a generation of my generation where we came from the aerobics days in the
Yeah.
90s where, where we do the Jane Fonda and Jamie Lee Curtis tuck, so
Okay.
that whole tuck. So, I guess my generation, like in our 40s and up, just be really mindful if you're watching this is we're not doing the aerobics tuck. Yes.
That's a good point. See, there you
Yeah,
go.
so
I'm
there's a
learning new things.
generation gap of language. All right, let's get to our bridge. So
All
I'm
right,
just
let's
going to
have a
move
look.
back a little bit so then you can see my feet. I
Yeah, and for
place my
those
block.
who've just joined in, welcome along. Ivy is going to be the student demoing. So I'm going to talk her through it. So she's got her feet about hip width distance, roughly. And she's got her feet just out of reach of her hand. So she could keep her feet there or she could wriggle them back a little bit. I don't mind having feet a little further away for bridge, because if I go into wheel from bridge, it also gives me a bit more space. And then she's going to squeeze the legs together. And then from there, take a breath in. Can you draw your tailbone towards your heels? Tailbone towards the heels. Take a breath in, and can you cinch in around the waist? So she's going to try and keep that awareness through the body, press through the feet, and start to lift your hips up halfway into your bridge. So just halfway up. And I'm not sure whether there she goes. I was like, I didn't know whether she froze. And then let's check in on those things again. Can you squeeze your legs into the block? Point the tailbone forward towards the front of the room, or really towards your heels or your legs. Take a breath in, and can you cinch in around the waist? And if she feels like, yes, that's spacious in her back, she feels stable, supported, then maybe she's going to lift up a little higher. And then can she squeeze the legs? Scoop the tailbone forward, so a little more lengthening, maybe starting to think about lengthening towards the knees. Scoop in around the belly. And again, it's like checking in. How does my lower back feel? If I start to feel like I'm compressing, maybe I shouldn't go higher for today. If I feel like I can maintain that length, support the space, then maybe she can explore coming up a little higher. And then same thing. So can you draw the tailbone now towards your knees? Scoop the belly in. And this becomes harder work now because the body wants to create that arch in the lower back. Yeah. And
I
then there's
really
the hip.
feel it in my legs, yeah.
Yeah. And
And
also
then
we
my
haven't
glutes
done
too.
a whole lot of other things. We haven't gone and done preparation. We haven't gone hip flexor release. We haven't gone and done core activation. So now we're going straight into it. And so the body will also tell you, all right, this is what's going on in my body.
Yeah.
How did it feel in your body, Ivy?
I actually didn't feel it at all in my back, but
Right?
I think it's an amazing awareness to activate through your core and your glutes, because I
Mm,
think we tend to rely our hips and that whole hip movement more when we're in sort of a back bend. We forget that if we use the strength of our legs and just that core activation through here, and your glutes just naturally turns on because you're cueing me all that awareness at stages of my lift.
mm,
Because I realized that halfway when I was trying to push up again, my legs relaxed again.
yeah.
And I was relying on just using my back strength and I guess my hips as well just to push forward.
Yeah.
And yeah, so it's great. I mean, I think it's a really good awareness for most of us, especially when we forget to turn on our glutes as well. So
Definitely.
yeah,
And
it feels
sometimes
nice.
this highlights the importance of foundations, of creating a solid foundation to then go further in your practice, because some people kind of
Mm.
bypass some of the foundations and they can go straight into wheel or straight into the deeper postures. But have you got the awareness in these more foundational postures, because it's the foundations that you take into wheel, and that's
Yeah.
what helps keep us safe and stable and supported.
Absolutely.
Great.
Does anyone have questions? And do you have any, like, if you want to demonstrate or join, feel free. But importantly, I think back bend is such a vulnerable pose for a lot of us these days. And I think just knowing which muscles and where your body needs to sit and feel, you actually get into it so comfortably, not having that fear, you know. I think most of us, positioning of our feet is a big thing. I think we do pull our heels too close, so then we jam our back when we try to push up into our hips.
Yeah.
And all that little positioning, just the alignment, just the awareness, even for teachers, just be aware that, you know, especially if you're a very flexible teacher, you've got a really naturally hyperextended, you know, joints and muscles, especially in our back. And, you know, some of us, we can do like this all day and not feel a thing. You know, cueing people who are naturally really stiff and sort of rounded forward. It's you got to have that awareness of your positioning of your feet, like you just mentioned. I think that's really important.
Yeah, and it's often these subtle things. It might not sound like rocket science, but when you make these subtle changes, then that can change how your knees feel, your hips feel, your spine feels, and then your shoulders feel. So it's what I found practicing. It's like the really subtle little tweaks that keeps changing things in my practice, in my body. Like literally just moving your feet a little bit, or moving your hands a little bit, or finding a little more space in your back, or a little more engagement in your core, makes the biggest difference, from sometimes pain to no pain. So yeah.
Yeah,
All right.
absolutely. All right, so we're gonna move into, I guess, wheel pose now. So
A couple of ways. So I'm going to explore two different ways to use blocks at the wall. So this is great for those who are practicing at home at the moment, because usually you can have access to wall space. There's a lot of studios that have wall space as well, so you could do this there, and that there's some that don't. But so this can be something that you take with you in your home practice, and maybe into a studio, or something to play with for now, because it will teach you a lot about your body, and maybe give you access to things that you thought you didn't have access to, or create a sense of space and even start to feel really good. So we'll start with the block as well, in between your legs, and then we'll have a look at blocks at the wall, and then you can choose to get rid of the props as well. And my suggestion is, if you're listening to this now and tuning in, if you do want to have a go at it, maybe this is when you save it and come back to the video to have a go when you are warm and your body's
yeah,
open, and when you've kind of prepared your body, because going into deep back bend cold is not something that I recommend. So let's have a look. This is one of my favorite ways to use props in a wheel posture. And this is also a shout out to one of my favorite teachers, Ella Kajokaru. She taught me these things years ago, and I've used them ever since. So what you do is you use blocks, and you're going to set it up on the second highest setting at the wall. And you want to have enough space for your head to fit in the middle, and you want to make sure that they're wedged at the wall. I'm going to keep the block for the first round. And just so you see, before I get upside down, is I'm going to have my palm on the ground and my forearm wedged against the wall, against the block. And what I'm doing is I'm using the pressure of my forearm into the block to create resistance. And this helps give me more stability from the ground up, and makes the entry into wheel easier, but also makes holding the wheel a little easier as well. So I'm going to try and shine some extra light in here and see if that, I don't know if that did anything. Maybe it does. Yes.
yeah, that's
All
better.
right.
Yep.
Yeah. So I'm going to use the block again, so that I use the foundations that I set up before. So, and I also want to make sure that I'm close enough to the wall. So my head is in between the blocks. Blocks are wedged into the wall. My feet are just out of reach of my hands. And so I'm going to use my bridge setup and then move into the wheel. So tailbone starts to point forward, press down into my feet, squeeze my legs into the block, start to scoop in around the center of the body, lift up, and I'm trying to keep the space, keep the legs hugging in, keep the belly drawing in. Once I've done all of that, I'm going to make sure I move my hair out of the way so I don't press my hands into my hair. I'm
And that's one
wedging.
thing when you have hair, your hair does get underneath your hands and they become like slippery
Yeah,
carpet.
you're going to pull at your own hair.
Yeah.
So I'm wedging my forearms into the blocks, pressing down into my feet, trying to keep the space in my lower back. I could go top of my head, or I can start to press all the way up. And then I want to think about the same things. Can I lengthen? Can I squeeze? Can I draw the belly in? And I'm using my forearms and pressing them into the blocks, which gives me a little more stability. I also like coming onto the balls of my feet because that gives me a little more space in my shoulders and thoracic spine, because that's where I'm wanting to move the back bend to come down, elbows bend. Try not to curl into a spinal flex position straight after you've taken the body into a deep back bend. Can you let it neutralize? Could you take your knees in to broaden your space at your sacrum or sacroiliac joint? I also kind of like taking my legs in the air, and that broadens the sacrum. You can also roll the wrists here as well. So rather than curling in, trying to find something neutral. I'm going to come into it again without the block in between my legs, just so you get to see one more time, and then depending on how Ivy feels, she might have a go. Press into the hands, forearms press into the blocks, point your elbows up, feet plug down, tailbone forward, belly in, my legs are squeezing in, but now no block. Lift up, and then I'm going to walk my feet in. So I want to find that squeeze in, trying to lengthening your tailbone now is much harder because I'm in a deeper back bend. I could also lift up and explore more thoracic spine back bend as I shift forward. And then again, come down, bend, and lower down, and give your body a little bit of TLC for your spine. So this just allows your shoulders to relax, but your spine to lengthen without curling in.
That looks really good. That looks very sort of nice transition, especially I think most of us, I mean, what are your recommendation, Amelia? You know, because one thing I find that a lot of yogis who starts off on wheels because their wrist is really tight. Obviously, we want to warm up our wrist really well before we go into wheel.
Definitely. Definitely warming up the wrist because it's quite strong wrist extension, and if you don't have very good wrist mobility, you'll put all the pressure in the wrist, or that'll stop you from exploring your wheel. While we're here, one last variation, and this is for those who do have tight wrist, poor wrist mobility, or poor wrist extension. So if you can't take your hand into this 90-degree position, then I would definitely recommend this next variation I'm going to show you. Because if you can only do this, as I hold my hand out, I'm going to try and, then I'm now going to force my wrist into that position. So this next one, the reason I like this is because it allows you to still explore the deep back bend, even though your wrists might not be ready to do the full variation without the props. Because I think it's nice to be able to open up doors in the practice, use some props, over time work on the wrist mobility, because that takes months and sometimes years. So this will allow you to start to explore it as you work on the wrist mobility. So this next part, you have the blocks on a diagonal. Make sure that the blocks are wedged into the wall and they're not going to move. So if they're a bit unstable, then move them into a position where they're wedged in. And if you're ever not using your mat, just be mindful the blocks might slide. So make sure that the blocks are wedged into whether it's carpet or your mat, so that they're stable. Same thing, move your hair out of the way. Head is in between the blocks. I'm going to hold onto the edges of the blocks, and I'm not pressing into the wall, I'm pressing straight down. Same thing with my feet, tailbone, legs, and I feel like I'm about to sneeze.
And bless you, Amelia. Just a bit of observation. I noticed that Amelia's hands are gripping the block, so I think that's important to know that you're not pressing your fingers down on the mat. You're actually gripping the top edge of the block, yeah?
Yeah.
With your knuckles. Yeah.
the corners of the blocks, and that allows me to use my fingers, which also helps me prevent dumping into the wrist. So I'm kind of grabbing and
Yeah.
holding onto the blocks. And then once I've done that, again, set up my feet, tailbone, hips, legs. I could go to the top of my head and test it out and see how that feels. Maybe this is as far as I go, or maybe I start to lift up into my wheel. Again, being mindful of trying to lengthen the tailbone, kind of scoop the belly in, and I might just stay for a breath or so. Over time, you might be able to stay up there a little longer. Again,
Yeah.
being warm is key, because if your shoulders aren't ready, if your hips aren't open, glutes aren't on, core is not on, you're more likely to put extra pressure through joints because the tissues haven't been opened up and stabilized and strengthened yet. All right. Do you want to have a go,
Fantastic.
Ivy? Have you got a wall
My
there, or should we
my
save it?
challenge, yeah, my challenge is finding a wall.
Yeah.
But maybe we'll ask if anyone would like to ask questions about setting up and, your challenges of getting up on a wheel. If you want to join us on video, you can send us a request. There is a little button at the bottom that you can actually click on to say request to join.
Yeah.
Yeah, and yeah, or just click send a message on the comments there. I think what my question would be, maybe that some things that people are thinking about is when we're going up on wheel, one thing I find that when I come into my full wheel, I actually feel more comfortable coming onto my toes, because then I create more space for my lower back as well, because I'm sort of higher up and I'm not sort of pulling my heel down, and then especially if my hamstring or my calf is really tight.
Yeah.
So if you're just starting out, and I don't know if that's a good idea, because I'm not an anatomy guru, but I just go by how I feel. When I'm in my full wheel, I naturally prefer to get onto my toes, because
Yeah.
I'm just a lot tighter through my hamstrings and my calf, and it just automatically feels so much nicer on my lower back. So what are your thoughts on that?
Yeah, definitely. And I do the same thing. Usually my first and maybe even second wheel, I come up onto the balls of my feet. And for me, it's because of the other side of my body. So my hip flexors tend to be a little bit tighter. In general, I know my hip flexors and my quads are definitely tighter. So as part of my warm up and preparation, this is a big part of what I try and open up: hip flexors and quads, as well as everything
Mm,
else. But by lifting up onto the balls of your feet, essentially I give my hip flexors and quads more space. So then it moves the back bend from the lumbar spine and moves it into my upper back. And maybe for you, it's more
yeah,
about, it gives you extra space in the back of the body to press and lift up. For me, it gives me more space in the front of my body so that I can keep moving the back bend into my upper
yeah,
back.
yeah, that
So
makes a lot of
yeah,
sense. Mm,
yeah, as long as it feels stable and you feel safe 100%. I often encourage my students to do it, to play with moving their chest a little more forward, because we are trying to move it, the back bend, into the thoracic spine and move it out of the lumbar spine. When we have less space, we tend to arch here, but where we're wanting to move is the back bend up higher.
maybe I'll go on a full wheel. I am warm because I just did yoga this morning.
Mm.
Um, and you can probably cue me, because one of the things I'm finding, especially in the last 12 months, um, my my mobility through here have completely sort of lost by half.
Yeah,
So where I used to be able to open up and pull my chest forward, yeah, towards the top of the mat, I'm now sort of hanging here now,
yeah,
So it'll be interesting, because where my mind is connected to where my muscle is, I I feel that I have really extended, but when I actually film myself and look at myself, my my elbows are just like so far forward, which I used to be able to get to here. So I'm interested
yeah,
to see how you're gonna cue that, like through the upper body, because I'm strong on my lower limbs,
Yeah.
but I'm always sort of working to strengthen my upper body and create more mobility through my shoulders and my chest as well.
Yeah.
So,
And just on that note,
mm,
this is, I think, that the dance of like building strength and mobility in different places, because
yeah.
as you mentioned, you're working on building strength in your upper body. And I also know this is maybe just more recently, you've been doing pull-ups and things, which I think is really great, because it's now going to balance out your mobility with your strength. But then sometimes your practice changes. So you're like, oh, I used to be able to go deeper. Now I can't, but you'll probably have more strength now. And so now it's like, okay, as we build the strength, let's try and open up a little more mobility. And it's like this kind of pendulum, build a little more strength, okay, build a little more mobility, and eventually, hopefully, we start to get to this place where it's a little more balanced and even. But
Yeah.
yeah, let's have a look. So, do you want to start lying on your back? And for those who have just joined in, hello, Ivy is going to do a demo of wheel, and I'm going to talk her through the alignment. We're going to see where we get to. So maybe we'll do one with the block and one without the block. Hi, Sam. All
And
right, Paul's joined
so you
in.
so yeah, so those who are just joining, Amelia's been doing it with blocks against the wall because I don't have a wall, so I'm just gonna get her to cue me as I'm going up without the wall, without
Yeah,
blocks and support. So
yeah. So she's got her feet hip width distance, feet probably just out of reach of her hands. And let's start, we'll go with maybe the bridge into wheel first. So maybe take the hands down beside your body. So, yeah. And then can you draw the tailbone towards your heels? Yep. Squeeze the block, draw the belly in. So now we've got a stable support around her sacrum and her lumbar spine. Can you take the hands up over your shoulders? Bubik, how are you? And then once you've got your hands up over your shoulders, can you find a feeling of squeezing your shoulder blades back and keeping your tailbone pointing forward? Once she's
wow.
there, I know there's a lot going on. And she can even go wider with her hands if she feels like she needs more space there. All right. Once she feels like, okay, I feel like I've got a base, can you lift the hips up? And she might go top of the head or she might lift all the way up. We'll see where she wants to go. Awesome. So she's going to play. We can't see her feet, but we're just going to imagine we can. Can you lift up onto the balls of the feet? And then
This is so
start.
much harder.
Yeah, I know, because now her legs are hugging together. The knees can't splay out. And then she's going to lower down. Yeah.
Wow.
Yeah.
So much harder
So
because I'm
take
not
the,
relying on bending my back anymore. I'm actually activating through my muscle
yeah.
groups that I'm not usually doing. So
And
take the
what
block
we
away.
could
Yeah.
yeah, take the block away. And what we could see is that it looked stable in your lower back, and there is probably like that thoracic spine mobility that we could work with, and shoulder mobility we can work with. But let's try without the block. Do you want to do one more?
Yeah. I'm
And
gonna
maybe
see
we
if I
can,
could adjust it further back. So maybe,
yeah, I think that will work.
is that better that we could see more of the full length?
Yeah, yeah,
All right.
great.
This is
Yes, excellent.
apartment living. This is what happens.
Yeah, this is just, let's figure it out as we go.
That's
All
right.
right, so
So,
she's setting up her feet, and let's go even actually, let's keep the feet there. They're in a good position. Draw the tailbone forward, scoop the belly in, and then she's gonna, now we're familiar with the base, so we're gonna take the hands up over the shoulders, and then find a feeling of squeezing the shoulder blades back, because in our back bend we have got retracted shoulder blades. Then she's gonna
those,
start to press up, imagining she's got the block there. Good. Now, can you lift up onto the balls of the feet and point your tailbone towards your knees? Point your tailbone even more towards your knees. Maybe walk your feet a little further away just for a moment, just to experiment. Yep. And now find a hug in of your legs. Yes. And now point your tailbone forward, scoop the belly in as you press your chest towards the wall in front of you. Great. Now keep that. Can you squeeze your legs in a little? Maybe you could explore, yeah, walking your feet in a little, lift up onto the balls of the feet. And so now in this position, as much as you can, tailbone forward towards your knees. Yes, I hope everyone saw that. So we just got a little more space there. Scoop the belly in that position. Yes. And then when you're ready, come out. But that would be for Ivy what I want to play with. And this makes all of this more intricate, sometimes more intense. She might take her legs in the air, arms in the air, let her back just go, ooh, hello, extra space.
That actually feels nice with your feet up in the air.
Yeah. Yeah, it's like your sacrum gets to flatten out there. Awesome. How did it feel for you, Ivy?
Oh, it felt amazing because what I usually do feel is going up, it's that deep compression into my lower back. That's the first, ooh, and then you just go, it's okay, and you convince yourself out of it.
Yeah.
So what happens there is that one was really strong on my upper body. I felt the stability, because it was really natural for me on my legs. But as soon as I start to transfer that weight onto my hands, that's when my upper body comes in. And I think, then you naturally just go like this. And when you squeeze your shoulder blades back, then it's kind of, you could feel it through my tricep, so then you could feel that transition. And I think this is the beauty about being cued through alignment is to have that awareness. You're actually training the right places in your body to work. I think that's what's really challenging for most of us. That's what we talk about when that body and mind connection.
Yeah,
we're essentially talking about that completely. It's really powerful, and I think so these sort of cue is so important for students and teachers to really get into.
Nice.
So I mean, just looking at my body versus your own, Amelia, like any thoughts on where sort of the advice and differences maybe?
Yeah, and I think everyone's variations are going to be different, and as like Ivy, like as you highlighted for yourself, you've got that like flexibility, especially through the lumbar spine, and this is where a lot of us have the flexibility. So this is where we tend to like compensate with. That's where we tend to bend, because the body usually goes into a place of least resistance. Okay, my body bends there, I'll let my body bend there. And so as I could see in your body, it was like just subtle little changes of lengthening your tailbone. Okay, we got a bit more space there, and then trying to draw in the belly. And it's not a huge action, it really is this almost like subtle internal work, and you could see just subtle changes. But then once you had a stable base around your pelvis and lower back, even though it was challenging, you could move into the thoracic spine back bend, because before it was more of a lumbar spine back bend. Then you moved it into a thoracic spine back bend. And if we think about where the body tends to be stuck and tight, it tends to be not lumbar spine stuck and tight. We might have pain there, but that's usually because we have lots of space and less support. But where we're really stuck is the thoracic spine, because if we think about our day over devices, chairs, stress, poor posture, and so this is where we want to open up, but that's where it is also going to be challenging. So expecting it to be work, but not painful. We're not looking for pain. We're looking for, oh, okay, my body needs this, but I want to go little by little. I don't want to like go really hard and really deep. I want to think about slow progression with back bends has been my experience with how it feels safest, strongest, and then I can continue to build on that over days and weeks and months, rather than let's try and get into my deepest back bend today. It's slow and progression. And in one class, every time I come into wheel, my wheel is like, okay, this is my first wheel. And then if I do a second one, I open up a bit more. The third one, I open up a bit more. So even if I've done a whole class and a warm up, I think of my first wheel as my warm up. And then my second wheel is like the next stage and the next stage. So
Yeah.
take
Yeah.
it
And
slow with back bends. Yeah.
I really recommend people to film themselves and then watch it after. Don't film and look at yourself.
Yeah.
But I think filming yourself is so powerful. Then you could, because right in that moment when you were cueing me, I felt like I wasn't really bending. I felt I was
Mhm.
in a strong bridge pose, if that makes sense.
Yeah.
As
Yeah.
soon as you cue me to bring my tailbone forward and then press my chest back, that's when I felt, whoa, this, I
Yeah.
feel the loading just transfer all through my thoracic and upwards. So
Yeah.
I think I'm really interested to see the video after,
Yeah.
just watch myself to see, does it look like a full wheel? Because
Yeah.
what my head was thinking is a full wheel based on how I felt in my body, usually feel in
Yeah.
my body, was so different from that
Yeah.
cueing.
And
So
I
I'm really
think
interested to see it.
we
Yeah.
can learn so much through observing, and I made all the teachers in the teacher training do that this week with other postures, because what
Fantastic.
what we what we feel is going to be often different to what we see, and then eventually it might start to marry up because we get used to, oh, okay, that's what it feels like. But you can learn so much from videoing, and I've learned so much from myself from doing that as well, and sometimes it's very humbling, and sometimes it's also really educational and really helpful.
Yeah.
Um,
So,
Maybe we'll segue to the next part, and the we know that wheel can be it's really strong and really intense posture, but physically, because of everything that's going on, but energetically, can you share a little bit about what is happening, or a little bit of insight into this posture?
yeah, so there is a beautiful mythology surrounding wheel pose. It's also known as chakrasana. So, chakra, if you've been practicing yoga for a while, or Ayurveda, you know about the chakra wheel, the chakra energy centers, through your to your sacral region, your solar plexus, your heart, your throat, and your third eye. So, it comes from this mythology, and I've got to really get this this name right. It's Vishwakarma, Vishwakarma, and he's the architect of the universe. So in a yogic um, books and all, he's the person that creates, not creates, but architecturally comes up with the structure of the universe. And he has a daughter, Sanjana, who falls in love with the god of sun, which is Surya. And because Surya, the god of sun, his sun rays is so hot, Sanjana can't get close to him, so he went to his father for help. So what his father then did out of love for her is to shave off the ray so she can get closer and closer to her love. And so with the ray, Vishnu, which is the god of the universe, he is the protector. Sorry, he's the protector of the universe, and his role is to return to Earth to balance things, balance the good and evil. And the rays became his weapon. And so the whole idea of chakra wheel, that it opens up an entire central of our universe, and that wheel, that light, is believed to be instilled in each one of us. So it exists in every human being in the shape of our being now. And what it does is then it gives us the power to release these light rays. And the whole idea through this wheel pose is to open out through to unconditional love. Yeah, imagine, the whole philosophy and the mythology that surrounds it begins with love. It was the love of two people, and then the love of father and daughter. And through that, Vishnu, who is your natural balance and protector of the universe, took it upon himself and created a weapon to actually, you know, um, balance everyone's energy by way of a protection when we're all sort of a little bit imbalance, and in the universe, things are kind of shifting. And I consider even this time now is a shift in balance, so we're so used to tipping the other way, you know, taking resources out of the earth and out of nature. And now nature's had rest for, oh, we're like what, 9 months, 10
Yeah,
months?
I know. Hopefully it's going
So,
to be so amazing when we get to go back out.
absolutely. And we all know that. And without sounding too, hippie or too sort of, going into that side of things, it is incredible how, a lot of things that we do, we don't really think about the story behind it, the real meaning behind our action and our intentions. So with every yoga pose, when we're physiologically getting into these poses, we're pushing our body. There's such a subtle layer of ourselves, which is our energetic self. It's also known as prana. In Chinese medicine, is qi. And they are our life force. They're the engine. They're the invisible energy that drives everything within us. Think about on scientific level, we're cellular, so cells is constantly moving and shifting. We're never still. So imagine that energy that gets created even inside us. So when we're stuck and our body goes like this and we're tight and we're rounded, we're containing that ability. We're reducing the space in our body, so there's nowhere to go, and it's just it's just like getting tighter and tighter, and obviously that affects emotionally, our perspective, our capacity, and just in general our well-being. So understanding, I think understanding the mythology and the energy of any practices completely allow you to go, so when I get emotional while I'm in wheel, that's normal. Because imagine what you're doing. You're you're letting go so much, and it's just such an opening. Even a slight chest opening can release so much responsibility of heaviness on your shoulders, and our hips house fears. This is our will, our gut feeling, So when we're unsure about ourselves, we tend to curl. When we're sad or we're hurt, we tend to want to sort of hide, So all of that, there's a lot to our physiological body versus, connecting with our emotions. So understanding what wheel is, once you go, you know what, I'm meant to feel that, that fear when I go into wheel. But if you tell yourself, this is meant to happen, you're meant to open up so that you release all that energy, then you actually will let go a little bit, and sometimes focusing too much on the anatomy actually could create that restriction. But you focus on the anatomy to get you there, and then energetically you go, I'm going to let go. This feels nice. I feel a little bit more open. I'm going to let myself feel open. I'm going to release my fear. I'm going to just let go a little bit. So all of that mantra and self-talk really helps in any movement and opening up yourself to any possibilities. So yeah, so I hope you enjoy that little mythology. It's
Thank
all
you for
about
sharing.
love. Yes.
I always learn more, and I can only relate to my experiences, but yeah, hearing about the mythology and that side of it, like, links up to the experiences that I've had. Often, like, wheel is this very invigorating and shifting and powerful posture, and often feel really like light and free. And it also, when you hear about what is going on, like, more through, like, the energetic qualities of a posture, it makes sense to that sometimes what you're feeling, or it helps explain, okay, like, it is a vulnerable shape, it is an exposing, but also that is so freeing and opening, and is part of why often, like, we want to keep coming back to it, because it is so therapeutic and it feels good. And even if it can feel intense, but often afterwards you're like, oh, that I needed that.
Yeah,
So yeah.
absolutely. And just imagine like the wheel, it begins with, it's like us orbiting around the sun. So there's a lot of heat. that comes from this pose. So imagine like you channeling your energy. And so you're meant to just feel supercharged, and you're meant to feel every challenges of that heat building, you know. So it's just like it does initiate, does elevate your nervous system because you're so supercharged. So you do have to be slightly aware where you are energetically when you go into these poses. If you've had a big day, you've had a super energetic day, and you just, you know, and you need something a little bit softer, you definitely don't do a wheel during the day. You want to, I mean, sorry, during the nighttime. But morning, wheel, bridge, any back bend is super invigorating. But at night, you just sort of want to sort of do a gentle one. A bridge is probably where you want to go. Anything later than, I believe anything later than 7, you should start letting your body settle, because that's when suns is setting. And when the sun sets, that's when your mind should follow, preparing yourself for sleep. And that's what we're not very good at. So
I know I've definitely done back bends
yeah,
later, and I'm quite sensitive to that, so I can, it often feels really great. I will acknowledge it often feels really great, but then when I'm trying to sleep later and trying to slow down and wind down, I'm like, I'm ready to go.
that's right. That's right. So,
Yeah,
well, look, guys, I mean, without going too long, I guess,
yeah,
you know, I
because we
hope you've
already have.
enjoyed that session. But we're very good. We just say 1 hour is our limit. And,
Yeah,
but again, next week we'll let you know what we're going to work on. We're going to push through these kind of poses that we find very challenging, and sharing stories behind it so you can connect to it in all levels. Yeah, thank you, Amelia.
yeah,
That was amazing. I learned so much. I seriously
yeah,
did.
and yeah, me too. Thank you, Ivy. And thank you, everyone who's jumped on. I know some of you were here the whole time, some of you have jumped on and off. And if you found it interesting, go back and watch it. If you think this could be helpful to someone, share it with them. If you feel like, oh, I should come back to this, come back and do it later when you're warm. Because we're sharing this so for you guys, you can get something out of it. And even if it's just one thing, sometimes it's that one thing that can be the thing that changes something. So experiment, let us know how you go. And if you have questions, reach out to either Ivy or myself, because that could be the theme for the following week, because
That's
we really
right.
want this to be helpful for you guys.
Absolutely. And next week I'll be hosting it. So follow Liquid Room, and so follow both of us at Access Yoga and Liquid Room, because we're going to alternate each week, um, coming up with live. Yeah.
Awesome. We've
And
got a Miami 2009. Thank you. I learned a lot, and I will definitely feel more comfortable trying it. Yes, and let us know how you go as well, because it's always interesting
yeah,
to hear how it goes. But thank you for jumping on. And if you have any questions, anyone, and let us know, because we want this to be helpful and useful tools.
great. Thank you
Awesome. I
all.
think we're
Have
going
a
to get
great
bumped off.
day.
Just see you, Ivy. Under an
See
hour.
you.
We did it. See you later.
Bye,
Bye.
everyone.